Level up your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes. This is such a fun talk. I so enjoy this talk. In this talk, we're going to build up a DevOps pipeline that pushes containers into Kubernetes. Now, here's the part where I show you the slides for this talk, but, well, there aren't any. This is the one and only slide, my notepad. You can grab the code for this session here on GitHub, github.com/robrich/levelupdevops, GitHub Actions and Kubernetes. And you can get to that URL. Here is GitHub, and you can get straight there. From robrich.org/presentations, you can get straight to this content. Here's Level Up Your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes. And you can get straight to the GitHub repository, which is right here. And there's no code yet. Yes, this repository is empty. We're about to fill it with a DevOps pipeline that will build and push a Docker image and deploy that site to AKS. Now, I have done one thing inside of my GitHub repository. I went in here to settings and I created some settings, some secrets here for my thing. So I have my ACR username, password, and URL, my AKS URL, and my kube config. Outside that, this repository is empty. Add to that, here's the folder that we'll build the content in, and, well, it's empty as well. Let's open that inside of VS Code, still empty. And here's that folder. We've got nothing, kubectl, get all. We've got nothing in our AKS cluster right now, and the directory is empty as well. Okay, let's go build up a DevOps pipeline. Now, to do that, we are first going to need a website, .NET New. I could go into Visual Studio and I could say File New Project, and I could build up a project inside of Visual Studio, but let's use the CLI because that'll be fun. When I say .NET New, there's various templates that I can choose from: a console app, a WinForms app, an NUnit test, an XUnit test. I could use an MVC site, a website, a web app, a web API, gRPC project. The new worker template is pretty cool. Blazor WASM is interesting. Let's do an MVC site in this case. .NET New MVC. I'll give it a name. I'll call it Level Up DevOps. And by default, if I didn't put in output, it would put it in a subfolder. I just wanted to put it straight in this folder. So I'll say --output . Now, starting with .NET Core 3.0, and so we're using .NET Core 5 here, or .NET 5, it will automatically do a NuGet restore right as we created that. Cool. So now we've got our website. Let's flip back over into VS Code. We have controllers. Here's our home controller. Our home controller will reference various views. Here's the views. So I can come into my home view. Welcome to Global Azure Mexico. I've got my website ready to go. And one of the next things that I need to do is start getting it ready for uploading to GitHub. I'm going to create a new file, and this will be a .gitignore. Ooh, do I want to build the assets? Yes, please. That will build this .vs code folder that will allow me to do some debugging things. That's cool. Now let's come back to gitignore. Now, in this gitignore file, I want to put all the things that I don't want to commit into my source control system. Bin, obj, star.user, star.suo, the .vs folder. This is everything that I don't want to commit. These are all of the things that I download as I build it, or the things that I build, all the built assets. Definitely don't want to check those into source control. As I start ramping up to build a container, I need a similar file here, and I'm going to create a new file, and it will be the .dockerignore. Now, these are all the things that I don't want to copy into my Docker container. Well, all of these things In fact, if I don't have a Docker ignore file, but I do have a git ignore file, then Docker will use that instead. That's really handy. In this case, though, I do want to specify a few more things. I don't need app settings.development.json in my production runtime container. And here inside properties is launch settings.json. Launch settings.json is the details that I need to debug my application. Here's my IS Express configuration. What port in IS Express should we use? Those are things that I definitely don't want in my production container. So now I have my Docker ignore file. Now the cool part is that everything that I specify in here will never end up in my container. That's bitten me a few times where it's like, yeah, but I just want to copy this one file, and well, yeah, it's ignored here. Next up, we need a Docker file. Now it's important that this is named Docker file and not dockerfile.txt. So if you've named it dockerfile.txt, rename it, change to just Dockerfile, and now we're ready to go. Now this Docker file is the configuration as code that gets us from our website to our image that we can deploy into Kubernetes. So we'll start off with a from line. I want to stand on the shoulders of giants and work on the projects that they've built for me. So let's come out here to Docker Hub. Now I'm going to go to hub.docker.com. I'll search for .NET, and let's choose the .NET base image. Now this .NET image is actually, well, not an image, but rather a list of .NET images. .NET SDK, that includes the build tools. ASP.NET includes the runtime for web apps. Runtime, that's just the things that we need to be able to run console apps or Windows apps. Runtime dependencies, each of these contains that one. And samples is a great place to see lots of different examples of Docker files doing interesting things. Well, in this case, we want to build inside the container. So let's click into the .NET SDK. And we're looking for the image name. Here it is. Here's the image name for .NET 5. It's in mcr.microsoft.com. And .NET SDK 5.0, that's perfect. I'm going to scroll down a little bit, keep looking at this, this environment. Ooh, here's all the tags. Now, in this case, these are the Linux tags. We're building a Linux container. That's perfect. Latest is the one that I would get by default, but I specified 5.0 here, right here. The tag is 5.0. That is built on Debian 10. Now, that's interesting. But I know that Alpine is a much, much smaller Linux distribution. So if I want to get my content to be really, really small, I'll use the 5.0-Alpine version. Cool. Let's do that from mcr.microsoft.com/.NET SDK 5.0-Alpine. Okay, so now everything in that Alpine .NET base image, including the build tools, is now available to me. Next step, I want to copy all of the files from my host machine, wherever I run that Docker build command, to the current directory inside of my image. Now, where is that current directory? Well, let's specify it, workdir/src. Now, there's nothing magic about that folder. Is it /src or /var lib bin? I can put that directory wherever I want, but /src is simple, so I like that. Now I've copied in all of the content, and now I need to do the standard .NET build commands. .NET restore all of our NuGet packages. .NET build, I'll build in release mode. .NET test, I'll also test in release mode, so it won't rebuild my app in debug mode. .NET publish -c release, I'll publish it to the dist folder. Now this is similar to a right-click publish inside of Visual Studio, where it will go grab all of the resources that it needs, all of the HTML files and CSS and JavaScript files, together with all of the DLLs that I need to be able to publish to IIS. Now, in this case, I'm not going to publish to IIS. I'm going to publish into my container. And I'm doing it inside of a build file. So it's not doing that, ad hoc publish that we would get from a right-click publish inside of Visual Studio. But it is that same packaging step. Now, I want to run all of these as Docker commands. So I'm going to run this one and run this one and run this one. And now they're Docker commands. I'm executing each of these shell commands as a Docker run command. Okay, now that we've built our distributed product, now let's change our work dir to /dist. And we'll set some environment variables here inside of our Docker file. Env ASP.NET Core _ environment. I'll set that to production. Env ASP.NET Core _ URLs. I'll set that to http://+:80. Now I specify this plus so that it will listen on all interfaces rather than just the default .NET interface, which is loopback. I want to be able to connect from outside of my container. And I'll also choose to expose port 80. Now this metadata identifies to the Docker runtime what ports that I expect to connect from or connect to. I want connections to come in to port 80. Okay, now let's cmd. This is the command that gets started when the container launches. .NET level up devops.dll. All the rest of these commands get run at build time. The cmd command gets run at runtime. These will build up my image. This will start the image as a container. Now this Docker file is great. We could push this into production and it would work just fine. But there's a couple of places that we could tidy up here. We could tidy up, well, we've got our build tools inside of our container. We've got our source code inside of our container. It's going to be a little bit bigger than it needs to be. I wish we could, say, separate these into the parts that do the building and the parts that do the hosting. Let's do that. And let's go ahead back out to Docker Hub, and let's go look for the ASP.NET runtime image. Here's this ASP.NET runtime image, and we have the particulars that we need to be able to build it. Now, I notice that as I scroll down, we also have an Alpine-based image here. That's cool. Because we're running on Alpine, it will be much, much smaller. So let's set that in place. Alpine. Now, this one only includes the ASP.NET runtime. It doesn't include the build tools. That's great. But now we need to get our content into place. Let's change this to app. And I do need to copy my content from the dist folder into the current folder. Now, right now, this copy command is going to copy it from my local machine here. I really want to copy from this other stage in this multi-stage build. I'm going to say from equals build. Well, where is build? I'll name this one as build. Now, there's nothing magic about this name in the same way there's nothing magic about these names. It's just that's a convenient way to explain it. So I will say this is the build, quote, server. It's not a server, it's a container. This is the build image. And this is the runtime server image. Here's all of the details that I need to be able to build my application. Here's all the details that I need to be able to run my application. I've now separated that into two different images. Now, as I do a Docker build command, it will build this image and then, well, discard it. It'll still cache it, but then it will go build this one that will only copy that built content into place. This image is going to be really small. Nice. There's one other place that we can tidy up here. We're restoring our NuGet packages after we're copying all of the files into place. Now, when we copy all the files, if I were to change an HTML file or a CSS file, then I would restore my NuGet packages. Really, I want to be able to restore my NuGet packages first and copy second. That way, we can use Docker's layer caching, and I can restore my NuGet packages only if the packages change. Okay, but I still need that manifest to know which packages to restore. So let's copy in the level up devops.cs proj into the current folder. I now have my manifest listing the projects that are the packages I need to restore. I'll restore them, and then I'll copy the rest of my content into place. That's perfect. We've got now a build image that will do all of the building. And then we've got a production runtime image that is really lean and optimized. We're also effectively using Docker layers so that we can be able to cache as quickly as we can and rebuild whenever necessary. We now have this Docker file. We also have this Docker ignore file. Next, this will be great for building the image. And next, we need to get that content into Kubernetes. Now, when we do this, we're probably going to go grab the Kubernetes YAML file that we used last time. So let's go grab that, and we'll set that in place here. Here's my Kubernetes YAML file. Now, here in this Kubernetes YAML file, we're specifying a deployment and a service and an ingress controller, or an ingress. Now, this ingress references HTTP application routing built into Azure so that we get automatic DNS creation for our containers. Now, we did this last time. Let's swap this out with level up DevOps. And now we can use it this time. Now, we could tweak other parameters, like what are our resource limits? Are we perhaps listening on a different port? But we also have some variables that will fill in as we do our build. Image label, ACR URL, our AKS URL here. These are variables that we can swap into place as we're starting to build out our Kubernetes YAML file to be able to run inside Kubernetes. Now, if we got to a sufficient level of complexity, we might want to spin up a Helm chart that will allow us to replicate these as well. That's not that unlike creating a view inside of MVC, where we just specify a few configuration parameters and we template out all of the other details. But in this case, I think this works for now. Okay, I've got my Kubernetes YAML file in place. Now let's take a look at committing this to source control. I'm going to stage all these things. I'm going to double check and make sure that I haven't committed anything that is built content or anything there. It looks pretty good. I could diff each file, but since all of them are new, it's all going to be the content here. Now let's commit this. Level up DevOps. I've got my content committed, and now let's push that. Git status, git push origin main. Git status, git log -- one line. There, I've got my content up on GitHub. So let's come back to GitHub and let's take a look at that repository. Now I've got the content in place and we're ready to start building out that DevOps pipeline. You can grab the link to this code from chat or hit up robrich.org and click on this presentation. That'll get you straight there. So here's the code that we've got. We've got our application, we've got our Docker file, our Docker ignore file, our Kubernetes YAML file. Let's build out the DevOps pipeline. I'm going to click here on Actions. Now, Actions is included for free in most subscriptions. You can get premium build time, but I've never had an issue where the free site is insufficient. Now we can look through the various workflows. I could create a Node app to Azure Web Apps, or Amazon, or OpenShift, Terraform. Cruising down, here's some other languages and frameworks that might be interesting. Laravel. Now, Pylint, it suggested that I might be building a Jekyll site, but I don't think I am. I think I'm building, well, let's start here with this Docker image. That's a good one. Now, this is just a template. I could have started with a blank file, but let's call this Docker Kubernetes. Docker build and push, Kubernetes deploy, Kubernetes apply. Now here in this build, we identify all of the steps that we want to do in our DevOps pipeline. Starting with, what branches do we want to work on? Well, I want to do this on the main branch. I don't want to do this with pull requests. We'll come back to that one. Now, what are the tasks that I want to do in this job? Well, I have two tasks so far. It first does a checkout, and then it does the Docker build. Well, I'm going to add some additional commands here. So right now we're doing a Docker build. I know that my Docker file is named Dockerfile, so I can remove that part. And this tag is interesting, but I want to be able to tag this more specifically. Level up DevOps. And really, I want to be able to specify the repository that I want to put this in so that then I can push. Well, we did create those secrets here. I can come here. Here's the secrets that I've got specified in my organization. And now I can use those secrets in my build with this $curly specifying secrets dot the name of my secret. Okay, so I want to get at that AKS URL. Let's say $curly secrets dot ACR URL. And now I've specified that path to my Docker registry. Now this specifies the date. I'm going to instead grab the github.sha. That will be my git sha for this build. Yep, GitHub sha, I spelled that right. Okay, so now I've built my image. It's going to run through my Docker file, doing all of those steps, Docker, .NET restore, .NET build, .NET test. Once I've got that built, if that succeeded, let's continue on and let's do the next thing. Docker push. I want to push this image into my Docker registry. Well, to be able to push to a registry, I do need to log into that registry. So let's do that. Now I'm going to come over here to the marketplace and I'm going to search for login to Docker registry. Ooh, Docker login. I like that. Now here in the actually, let me go back to the search results. I'm going to grab login to Docker registry. Nope, I am going to grab the Docker one. There we go. So here in this marketplace listing, I can go into the details for this one. And in this case, here's the Docker login, and it has some particular details about how it works. And that's interesting. I can also get to the source code for this one as well. But in this case, I'll just go after the YAML here. Here's that Docker login. Let me indent my YAML correctly. There we go. So my Docker login action. First thing I need to do is give it the details of how I will log in. Now, what's my registry URL? Well, I've got a secrets for that, secrets.acr URL. What is my username? Well, I've got a secret for that as well. Let's do secrets.acr username. What's my password? Let's go grab secrets.acr password. Do I want to log out at the end of the job, at the end of this entire build? Oh, yeah, sure, let's do it. Okay, so now I've done my Docker login so that when I get to this step where I'm going to do a Docker push, then I'll be able to push to my registry. I'm already authenticated to it. The next thing that I want to do is kubectl apply. Now I'm going to pass in the k8s.yaml file here. Now in our k8s.yaml file, we have these replacement expressions that we need to swap into place. Okay, so back in our GitHub Actions, we can go grab this sed command that will replace them into, that will adjust them into place. Now typing a sed command, especially one this long, is interesting, but copy and paste works. So I'm going to sed into this k8s YAML file, and I'll sed in place. I'm not going to back up, and I'm going to replace ACR URL with my secrets.acr URL globally across the document. Replace my AKS URL with the AKS URL. Replace my image label with the GitHub SHA. So now I've replaced all of these details here in this Kubernetes YAML file. And now when I do a kubectl apply, I'll have those correct values in place. As I rebuild my thing, I will get the git hash here in this image label. Now the git hash isn't semantic versioning, it isn't semver, but it is unique every time. Now, if I wanted a semver, I might use a variable like the build number here inside GitHub Actions. That could be interesting. Now, I very specifically chose to sed the content here after I did the Docker build and push because, well, maybe in my Docker ignore, I forgot to ignore the k8s.yaml file. Now, because I forgot to ignore that, then it's possible that my settings might end up inside my Docker image. I definitely don't want to do that. So I'm going to make sure that I sed my image, sed my my secrets into place after I've already pushed my image. Now, the other thing that I need to do here is I need to log in to my Kubernetes cluster. So let's come back to the marketplace and let's look for a Kubernetes login. Kubernetes set context. Ooh, here's one. Azure Kubernetes set context. Here's the YAML that I'll need here in my build file. And so let's set that in place right here. And I'm now going to indent it correctly. And we can get the details of how to set the context. Ooh, this is not the one that I was looking for. Oh, that is the one that I'm looking for. No, it's not. That's the one that I'm looking for. Yes. There we go. Now, the beauty of this one, as opposed to the other one, is I have this method where I can specify how do I want to authenticate into my Kubernetes cluster. I could do it with a kubeconfig or a context, a Kubernetes secret and URL. Now, I want to use the kubeconfig method. The kubeconfig method will just get that secret. I can grab my kubeconfig secrets from my local machine. I'll go pop open my home directory. I'll look in my kube folder and I'll pop open this config file and go get that secret. Once I've got that secret, I'll come in here to GitHub and I'll set that secret in place in one of these secrets. And now I want to use that kubeconfig here in my build. So what is that kubeconfig? Well, I've specified it here as secrets.kubeconfig. And now that's in place. So I don't need the context. I don't need the k8s URL and secret. And I'm now authenticated into Kubernetes. So here's that build process where I check out all of my code. I log into Docker. I log into Kubernetes. And then I build Docker, build Docker build and push, kubectl apply. So I'm doing the Docker build, specifying these secrets to get the correct image name, and then doing a Docker push to be able to get that up to my Docker registry, and then changing out all my secrets in the Kubernetes YAML file, and ultimately kubectl apply that Kubernetes to start the site. Let's start this commit, and we'll say create GitHub Actions build file. Build file. I'm going to commit it directly to the main branch. And now this is just one of the files in my repository. So here's that .github/workflows folder, and I just have this file. If I come back into my local machine, git pull, I can be able to interact with this file as if it was just a regular file in my workflow. So I could choose to change it here, or if I needed to, I could pop open the designer again and change it there. Well, because we now have a file here inside .github/workflows, it's going to kick off a build. We have this yellow dot here. So digging into that, let's take a look at this build. Now, this is going to do all of those steps. Docker login to my container registry, Kubernetes login to my Kubernetes cluster. It's going to then run my Docker file, which will pull down my base image, do my Docker, do my .NET restore, .NET build, .NET test, .NET publish. Then I'll be able to grab that into my second stage of my Docker container and build that up. Ultimately, I will push that up to my Azure Container Registry and start it here in Kubernetes. And it looks like that has succeeded. Very nice. Now, it will take a minute for that system, for the DNS to propagate, but I can look here, kubectl get all. I now have this new website here. Here's my Level Up DevOps service, my Level Up DevOps pod. And if I look for my ingress, here's my Level Up DevOps ingress controller. Now, it will take a minute for this DNS to propagate, but we can do a trick here where we can port forward into particular things. Now, we could choose to port forward into a particular container, or we could port forward into a deployment, so it'll round robin across those pods. We could port forward into a replica set, or we could port forward into a service. Let's port forward into our service, and that'll skip the DNS step. Very nice. So here we'll do a kubectl port forward service / level up DevOps. Now I could go from port 80 on my local machine to port 80 in the service, but in case something else is running on my local machine on port 80, I'll just switch that to 8080. Now that I've got that port forward set up, I can come back here into my website and I can go to localhost 8080, and I have this site running in Azure right now. Welcome to Global Azure Mexico. Woohoo! So we were able to do that build. We generated our site, we built up the Docker file and the Docker ignore file, and then we built up that GitHub Actions pipeline to be able to build all of that content and ultimately deploy to Kubernetes. Now, here in our repository, it would be nice if we had, I don't know, say, a README file that told us a little bit more about our project. Let's build that. I'm going to create a new file, readme.md. Let's go copy some content for that README file. Here's some interesting content. Now, wouldn't it be nice if I had a badge that could tell me how my build was doing? Let's go reach out into GitHub Actions and go look for a build. Actions, I'll take a look at this Docker build and push, Kubernetes apply, and here I can say create status badge. Now, this is all of the YAML that I need to be able to display that badge. Very nice. Copy. I will set that in place right here. And now I'll get a badge right before my description. Let's commit that into place. Coming here into Git, and we will stage that. Ooh, we'll also stage that spot where I correctly ignore the Kubernetes YAML file. And how might we do a build for pull requests or for other branches? Well, let's come in here to this build file. I've already got all the steps that I need. Let's copy this, and I'm going to say, let's create a new file for docker pr.yaml. This will be only those steps that I do for a pull request. So I'll do this on all of the branches that are not main. And I'll also do this for pull requests for all branches. Okay, so if you do a pull request into this repository, or I'm committing to any other branch I don't want to deploy to production, I'm just going to do this step instead. Now, I don't want to kubectl apply. I don't want to send it off to production. Let's delete that line. Because I don't kubectl apply, I don't need to set my secrets into place. Let's delete that line. Because I'm not doing anything with Kubernetes, I don't need to log into Kubernetes. Let's delete that line. I don't want to Docker push this to the registry. That container was only meant for particulars associated with this pull request, so I'll delete that line. Because I'm not pushing, I don't need to log into Docker. Let's delete that line. And I probably don't even want to specify my container registry. I'll just leave it as level up DevOps-PR. My goal is to validate if the Docker build runs correctly and if all my unit tests pass, not to deploy this anywhere. So now I have a build specific to pull requests and to other branches. Okay, let's stage that one as well. We'll stage this new PR, and then we'll give it a comment. README and PR build. Commit. Git hist. Git push origin main. Oh, git hist is my alias. Oops. Git log --1 line. That's what I did. There we go. So now that's pushed up to GitHub, and now it's going to go do that process. Now this process is the same process because I pushed to the main branch. It'll do the same process that it did before. Now I could come in here to look at my build, but let's go into GitHub Actions directly and take a look at it there. I can choose between my builds. Now, oops, I forgot to rename the one that is the PR, but let's take a look at what that build is doing. Here's the job that it's running. So it needs to log into Docker. It needs to set my Kubernetes context. And once it's going to do that, it's kicking off the Docker build. Inside our Docker file, we're going to go do our .NET restore, .NET build, .NET test, all of the 0 tests passed, .NET publish, grabbing all of those resources and collecting them together and copying that into the other stage. Once we've got that other stage in place, we'll push that up to Azure Container Registry. And then we will, once our Docker build has succeeded, we'll push that to the container registry. And then we'll do the Kubernetes replacement and ultimately the Kubernetes apply. So we've got a second build, and this build is green as well. Now that we have a green build, let's take a look at our README. Ooh, there's our badge telling us that this build passed. That is really cool. So now what about other branches? Well, I could come in here and I could build another workflow file. Let's maybe say we're going to go to our dev server from our develop branch. So I'll say docker dev.yaml. Now I want to do all of the things, but maybe I want to use my dev ACR URL and my dev username and my dev Kubernetes environment. Or a new feature here inside of GitHub Actions allows me to create secrets that are specific to each environment. So right now, my secrets are global to all environments, but I can go create a new environment and add development specific secrets targeted to the develop branch. Now, when my build runs on the develop branch, it'll get those secrets. And when it runs on any other branch, it'll get these secrets. Arguably, I should move these into the main branch so that it will be for my main deployment. Now, because I've managed the different environments through these secrets, I don't need a separate dev YAML file. Instead, I'm just going to say this one works for main and develop. And now my PR branch doesn't need to work for develop. So let's say not main and not develop. Cool. Let's say Docker build for PRs. So now I've got these two workflows, one that works for all of my regular branches using GitHub Actions secrets specific to that environment, and another one that does pull requests that won't actually deploy or push anywhere. Now this Docker file is able to craft all the particulars of getting my application into a container, and this GitHub Actions build will deploy that to my Docker container registry and ultimately to my Kubernetes cluster. And then once I've got that running here in my website. Now, the cool part about this is all of this detail just used a Docker registry and a Kubernetes cluster. You notice that there's nothing in here that says anything about Azure or Amazon or Google. Well, other than that's the task that we used. But we're logging in with a Kubernetes config and with a registry username, URL, and password. We could do this process just as easily to our on-prem cluster as we could to our cloud cluster. We could do this just as easily to GCP as we could to AWS. GitHub Actions is agnostic to clouds that way, in that we can do this build anywhere that we need to. We built up our Docker file to package our app into a container, and we built up our GitHub Actions pipeline to be able to deploy that container to our registry and start that site in Kubernetes. kubectl get all. Let's see if DNS has propagated yet. Let's go to this site. Nope. DNS has not propagated yet. But that was so much fun. We've been able to build up a DevOps pipeline really easily inside of GitHub Actions to be able to deploy containers. You can use this to deploy containers or to deploy Azure Functions or Azure Web Apps. GitHub Actions is a really powerful and elegant tool to be able to deploy all the things. The code that we built is up in that repository, github.com/robrich/levelupdevops with GitHub Actions. I'll put that in chat here. And you can get to that repository really easily by going to robrich.org and clicking on presentations. If you're watching this demo later, hit me up on Twitter at rob_rich and let's continue this conversation.